What's going on YouTube? Username Kite562 here with an audio review of The Dark Half by Stephen King. Now, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy the content on this channel. I'm your host, Kite562 of Kite562 Books and Manga Reviews, giving you a long audio review of The Dark Half by Stephen King. Now, the first time I read this book, it was 16 years ago, if you can't believe it. But yes, with the thumbnail of this video or continuous image of this audio review, I'll be showing the version of The Dark Half that I read from the first time, but for the second read, it was just a paperback version from Signet Publishing, Signet Fiction. I'll leave a link to my playlist of Stephen King book reviews on the top right of this video review, so sit back and relax and listen to what I have to say about my thoughts revisiting The Dark Half by Stephen King. Now, as for the plot, Thad Beaumont wanted to be a writer when he was only 11. He won an award for an American teen for his story Outside Marty's House. Thad also had to go through brain surgery after he had a grand mal seizure outside of his parents' house when he was waiting for the bus to pick him up. Now, with Thad having epilepsy, which I found really relatable in this story, in more ways than one, so this whole experience of rereading this book was just a really wonderful and really solid experience for me as a whole, and it was just a really nice way of revisiting this story in general. And I have to say, this book itself is really well layered, and I hope with this review, when I'm done with it, that it helps give The Dark Half by Stephen King a way to give the novel a lot more attention in 2024 for the time being. And so, for my first favorite quote from this novel, people's lives, their real lives, as opposed to their simple physical existences, begin at different times. And that's from The Dark Half, page 3. And so, for side note number 1, so within the very first chapter, it looks like Thad is married and has 2 kids. Thad seems to be in the middle of killing off his more aggressive alter ego George Stark, a take on Stephen King's Richard Bachman. I really do like how quick and digestible everything is in this book. Now, for the paragraphs of this book, there's like regular named chapters and then a number on top of them, which I think is from another writing style of Shirley Jackson, which I never read any of her works, but I'm not going to make any assumptions that her books have this like numbered paragraph system, but I feel like it was a really easy way to keep track of everything once I understood how everything flowed. And so for the last part of this side note, so which Thad's alternate writer self only lasted from 1975 to 1988 and labeled as a not a nice guy on page 18, chapter 1 of The Dark Half. So again, George Stark is like Richard Bachman, and I thought it was a really enjoyable read after seeing this introduction as a whole. And for my second side note, George Stark had 3 different prison charges. One for arson, assault with a deadly weapon, and assault with a deadly weapon with the intent to kill. Also, George Stark is 39 years of age, according to page 27. Machine's Way was a George Stark novel written in 1975 and published in June of 1976, according to page 29 here. And so, as I kept on reading, I couldn't put this novel down for the life of me. It was just a really wonderful experience as a whole. It was just an absolute blast for me revisiting this book. And so, for the third side note, I can remember why The Dark Half pulled me in so quickly. The scenes are really well written, especially with Liz and Thad Beaumont, along with their earlier scenes of young Thad and his family in the 1960s where they lived in New Jersey. Also, the first dream sequence in chapter 2, breaking up housekeeping on page 33, even though it's a dream, George Stark is still a menacing presence all on his own. And I'm going to leave it at that and let you read the book for yourself and come to your own conclusion. And so for the fourth side note, with the death of the previous sheriff, George Bannerman is now dead, according to page 52. Chapter 4, Death in a Small Town. And kind of these books have particular conclusions, but I'm not going to go into detail other than that. And so, according to page 52, chapter 4, Death in a Small Town, Big George was killed by a rabid dog on Town Road number 3. Could this dog have been a St. Bernard by any chance? Who knows? Who knows? And so, for the item note, the license plate number of the car in question is 96529Q for a 1971 Chevy pickup truck, white with maroon primer paint according to page 55 of the Dark Half. And I have to say, for my favorite quote number 2, Dodie Eberhardt was pissed off. And when Dodie Eberhardt was pissed off, there was one broad in the nation's capital you didn't want to fuck with. The Dark Half, page 71, chapter 6, Death in the Big City. And so for the 5th side note here, the scene I remember from 16 years ago from the Dark Half is on page 77, chapter 6, Death in the Big City. And I mean, it was so flamboyant and out of left field that memories just kept on rushing back to me. Like, it's not even funny. Like, man, it was great revisiting this book. Just absolutely a great phenomenon for this. And so for side note number 6, so Sheriff Alan Pangborn refuses to shake Mr. Beaumont's hand according to page 84, which is after the murder of, I think, Frederick Clausen within his apartment, Death in the Big City, page 77. Go read the book, and that's all I'm going to say about that. However, could Thad benefit from Homer Gamache's death, or was he just testing the waters of his celebrity, perhaps? And this is before George Stark makes his absolute appearance, since Alan thinks Thad's the one who's been doing all these mysterious killings. And so, for a reader's note I wrote down here, I couldn't figure out why there are named chapters and numbered sections in this version of the Dark Half. I'm reading, for example, Chapter 7, Police Business, Paragraph 1. From what I conclude, the chapters are keeping a number track of all the paragraphs within the title chapter being read. And so if you've never seen that before, I hope you come across this audio review, and there, now you know. And so for side note number 7, so for some research before I read chapter 9, The Invasion of the Creepazoid in the Dark Half, it turns out this book has numbered paragraphs again. After knowing this, it's much easier to keep track of where you left off reading-wise. If you know Stephen King, he writes really long and really in-depth chapters, and all in all, I just find it to be a really wonderful experience as a whole. I love a good thick book when it comes to reading. And so for side note number 8, so from chapter 10, titled Later That Night, during his explanation of the bird sound, a phrase was written both at the Frederick Clausen crime scene and in one of Thad's manuscripts of The Golden Dog, The Sparrows Are Flying Again, a phrase that seems to connect Thad and George Stark hand in hand. I'm also really seeing some similarities between this story and the novella Secret Window, Secret Garden, with Mort Rainey and the John Shooter dilemma situation, whatever you want to call it. And all in all, I couldn't put this book down. Like, it's that good of a King book. And so for number 9 of a side note, in chapter 11, Endsville, Thad is told by his doctor to get a CAT scan, or a computerized axial tomography, or CAT scan for short, according to page 136. And so on pages 137 and 138, as Thad enters a trance-like state, he starts going on to what seems to be an automatic writing process. Words like sparrows, cats, miss, Mr., razor. As I look back on this jumble of words, it could have some meaning later on in the story. However, as of now, it seems the character's named Sis or Sissy. Could she be Stark's next victim in this case? Again, read the book and I'll let you find out. And so for the 10th side note here, we've already gotten into the double digits. Man, chapter 12 was utterly brutal. With what happened to Miriam Cowley, my heart just utterly broke for this woman as this chapter went on. However, could Miriam's rather be intimidating? Miriam's brother could be imitating George Stark, or does Rick think he's George Stark himself? So that's the conundrum here with that scene. And moving onwards, chapter 13, Sheer Panic, was intense. I just hope Alan Pangborn will be alright after the incident with Miriam Crowley. Or Cowley. This story is really picking up heat at this point when it gets to the 13th chapter, and I mean, in all superstitions, 13 is an unlucky number. And then as I went on, chapter 18, Automatic Writing, in the book really sent several shivers down my spine as I read it, along with the previous chapter moment where Wendy fell down the stairs and ended up with a mushroom-shaped bruise, only for William to end up with the same one moments later. It seemed very eerie to me, but at the same time, Both William and Wendy are twin infants. Fraternal twins, I think. Yeah, fraternal's the word I'm looking for here. And I have to say, for my third favorite quote, Liz watched him walk slowly toward her. He looked like a decayed scarecrow which had somehow come to life. The Dark Half, page 337, chapter 21, Stark takes charge. And I have to say, that was like one of my favorite moments from this book. It was just really intense, really brutal, and all around a really nice revisit of this classic book to me. And so, for my final thoughts, a very enjoyable novel by Mr. King that I think should get more attention by people as time goes on. The villain George Stark does have some well detailed and terrifying moments within this book. What I loved about this book while rereading it is the book kind of starts out like a sci-fi horror story. Then as you go on, it shifts into a brutal murder mystery to then finally a supernatural thriller of a story. I highly recommend this story. You need to read The Dark Half by Stephen King if you love genre layered stories, and that's the best way I can describe this revisiting experience of mine. And all in all, if score-wise out of 10, I give The Dark Half an 8.9 out of 10 with a recommend if you go read it. So I'm your host, Kite, of Kite562 Books and Manga Reviews. Be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content on this channel. Again, I'm your host, Kite, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. Later.